Okay, so welcome. Today we're going to be learning about how to create low polygon modeling assets inside of Maya. It's one of the things that people regularly use for making games and for making objects that don't have a very high poly count, which means that they don't have many faces that kind of like take up memory inside of the computer. There's a whole host of tutorials online to help you guys do this, but in Maya 2017 I want to talk to you guys about the Polygon modeling tools, and I might go into a few other tutorials in future that cover other different types of workflows. Now, it's important that one of the reasons why some 3D artwork looks so great is because as you develop your skills as a 3D artist, you learn how to take images or reference that you find online and you turn it into a 3D object. I'm just going to show you guys a quick example of an image that I found online. Find a link to the author's work in the descriptions below. And it's just a translation of a piece of concept art that I found online, and I made a 3D version of this using Maya and some hand-painted textures. Now, they don't exactly match one-to-one because I'm trying to create something that's a little bit different, but it's always important to have a good source of reference when you're trying to create any type of modeling inside of Maya. The thing that makes people go from learning how to model in 3D to be absolutely great at modeling of 3D is always having good reference. And what we're going to do first of all today is I'm going to be showing you guys how to create a reference plane and how to import images inside of Maya that we're going to be using to directly model on top of. We're then going to be looking at making a very simple low poly object and saving it as a proxy for production. And later on in the tutorial, we'll start going specifically into each one of the tools and how you can use them to start creating some basic shapes that will end up turning into this tower that we hope to have rendered by the end of this tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our scene to work in Maya in a very similar way that we did previously. Of course, I've got a blank version of Maya here, and the first thing I'm going to do is set up a new Maya project. Again, you're going to have to get into the habit of this so that Maya saves all of your files in the right place. Now, this project I'm going to call low poly modeling, and I'm going to call it 01 because this is going to be the first in a two-part series. I'm going to make sure that I save this somewhere on my hard drive over here, my folder of my tutorials, and I'm going to hit accept. Now, it's important that I do this because my reference images, I want to save them inside of my project. And I've actually spent a little bit of time actually making some reference images that I will post somewhere online as well if you want to grab them, so check the show notes as well for this. And the trick is that I'm going to be making this type of lighthouse tower over here, so you can see the tower theme kind of like coming into the tutorial today. This model over here is actually a render from Maya, so this is actually the finished object that I've turned into images, but you should look for blueprints or images as a beginner that have multiple views, and the trick is that these images should be quite a large size. You'll see that the height of this tower, it's about 1,000 pixels in height. You can't use really tiny images for reference inside of Maya without causing some form of problems for your eyesight specifically. The other thing as well is that you'll notice that with these Photoshop guys, these images are perfectly aligned. And that's really important as well because later on I cut them up into individual images that I'm importing into Maya. For reference, there's no specific format that's necessary. Sometimes you want something that's high quality, but JPEGs would do, PNGs would do, OpenEXRs. If you really needed an amazing piece of reference, I don't know why, it would work as well. So I'm going to go back into Maya over here. And inside of Maya, what I'm going to do is just start loading up all of these images. But first, I'm going to have to come into my Finder window and put the images that I currently have on my desktop, a top view, a side view, and a front view, into the orthographic views inside of Maya. So what I'm going to do is just copy those for now, and I'm going to paste them inside my project folder. So I'm going to go into my tutorials, low poly modeling 1, which is my project, and inside here, any reference images or texture reference images should be stuck into the source images folder, because that's where Maya is going to go look for these images at the start. So I'm going to paste them in there, and that'll mean that when I open the images up in Maya, they're going to go straight into this folder and look for these textures over here. So when you're starting off creating a 3D scene as a beginner, as people get more proficient, they're always very happy working around in what we call the perspective view, this single viewport mode. I'd recommend as a beginner, press spacebar over here, and you'll see that I have this quad view come up over here in my viewport. These 4 views are going to be really helpful for getting you to develop your skills in how to look at 2D images with 3D space in mind. So a lot of times it's good to have these orthographic views, the top view, the front view, and the side view, actually as part of your guide. And as you develop your 3D skills and your 3D awareness, it's easier for people to be working in the perspective view all the time. So don't be surprised if you find many tutorials online of people who are professional who do absolutely everything inside of here. They've developed those skills, they can work just fine. But some people I find when teaching really need some help of having multiple views to discover where everything is. For this tutorial, I'm going to keep all of the 4 images open all the time, and I'm going to try and post it as high resolution as I possibly can as well, because I want you guys to see that I use multiple views in this case to help you guide you through how to model this lighthouse. So how can I start importing my reference images? Well, there's many ways, but I'm going to choose a very simple one. I'm just going to maximize this top view over here for a second, just so that you guys can see this little button over here, which is like a little blue cyan plane up here. And this little icon is an image plane. This allows me to create an object inside of Maya that will stick this top JPEG onto the background of my viewport. So if I hit open over here, you're going to see that it's going to open up in the middle of my scene this top viewport, which is really handy for me. So this is going to be my lighthouse as seen from the top of my Maya scene. I'm going to press spacebar over here, and you see that that is represented in the other views as well. And now I've got this front view over here. So in the viewport buttons, again, I'm going to click on the image plane button, and I'm going to go all the way to up here and choose my front one. Cunningly named as well, so that they're easily found as well. And you'll see that all these images are being brought in like this. Then I'm going to come into here, and I'm going to go and see how I can stick it into the side view over here, which is the last image that I need. So again, repeat that operation all over again, and now I've got all of my images saved inside of my scene. So what am I going to do next? Well, it's a good time to save. So I'm going to save my scene as, I'm going to choose to be saving as a Maya ASCII file, because I've set my project up, my scenes folder is selected and it's ready to go. And I'm going to call this low poly modeling .0001 so that I can use increment and save, and I'll chuck in the extension .ma at the end of it and hit save. There we go. I'm checking my name up here, so that looks good. And now I've got my first version of my scene as well. So just in the case that Maya crashes, I can always come back to this point and start work from here again. Now, we've got all of our image planes inside of here. Okay, almost ready to go. There's one little thing that we need to do, which is just move these image planes around a little bit. Because really what I'd want to do is, if I open my quad view up again, is I'd like these to not be in this kind of like crossed version inside of my scene. I actually want them to be able to be off the side here because I'm going to do all the modeling in this middle part of the image over here. So I'm going to take the top view, I can click on here, and using the move tool or pressing W on my keyboard, I can bring up the transform gizmo and drag this down a little bit so that the image is off the image plane. And the thing that I want to do with this is that you'll see that there's kind of like these subdivisions, these little lines that exist in the image, and they're not exactly lining up with the actual center of my scene. You can see this Maya grid, which is inside of my scene, and what I want to do is make sure that the lines of my reference match the origin of my scene, like that. There's always a little bit of adjusting that you need to do with every image over here. Now over here in my front view, I can't see my grid. And I don't know why that is, but there is a handy little grid button up here in the viewport filter, which will turn my grid on and off. And also, if you ever get lost, you can always go into the display option up here in Maya and turn on the grid by clicking on this button here as well. So what I'm going to do is come into here, and I'm just going to move this up a little bit. But I'm not going to be too concerned about this one over here. I just want my image to be kind of like aligned in the right place, like that. And this one I want to do the same thing. Put the actual base of the lighthouse on the ground, which is that slightly thicker line in the middle of your grid. And I want to move it along until it is in the middle of my scene, just like that. Okay, now with just one little movement more, actually I almost forgot that what I want to do is take this image over here and I just want to move it in the x-axis over here just so that it's slightly off the side like that, and then I'm going to take the front view over here and move it in the z-axis like this. You should notice that this size of the images does not change as I move them in the viewport, because these orthographic views don't have perspective. They don't make things smaller as they disappear off into the distance like that. So very handy for us to lay everything out. Now, before we proceed, many people would now just dive into modeling. And I know that you guys are excited to kind of like get into making things in Maya as quickly as possible, but I always want people to take a step back slightly and just to consider one thing that's going to be important. Many times when you're working professionally, you have to work to a specific scale. How big is this lighthouse? Well, it's not going to be tiny like a little figurine over here. It's probably going to be the correct size. So for this example, I'm thinking that this lighthouse is going to be around 13 meters tall, 14 meters tall, just because I'd measured this scene out previously and decided that that's kind of like a convincing size for the object that I'm trying to build. Maya has a specific set of units over here, and currently Maya is telling me that this scene has a specific size. All of the units inside of Maya are inside of centimeters. And it's important for me to start thinking as a professional, how big does this lighthouse have to be inside of my game engine, inside of my renderer? If I'm working with other people in a studio, we all have to be working to the same scale. And I just brought in an image from Photoshop, which is in pixels, but I have no clue of how big Maya thinks this scene actually is. I'm going to go into the Create window very briefly, and I'm going to bring up one of the measure tools over here and choose the distance tool, which will allow me to create with two clicks, 2 points in space, and give me a rough approximation of how much a distance is between those 2 points. So I'm going to click on the distance tool, and let's say inside of this front view over here, I'm just tapping spacebar to maximize it a little bit. I'm going to drag a point from kind of like the top of the lighthouse all the way to the bottom over here. And Maya's telling me that this is 10 centimeters tall. That's about this big. That's how big my lighthouse is. But what's the matter? You know, does it really matter what scale I actually make some things? Well, for your own projects, no. But when you're working with things professionally, it will matter a lot. Now, I'm going to be working as if this was going to be inside of a game where size is actually important and it's matched to the real world. So I actually want this not to be 10 centimeters tall. I want it to be 13 meters, 1,300 meters big. As you can guess, that if I was actually zooming out over here, that means that my scene is actually short by a really, really, really long way. So it's important that whenever you start a Maya project, you start with scale in size. And the only reason why I'm using real world scale is renderers like Arnold or like V-Ray have some very interesting real world lighting options, which if you've measured your scene to scale, then you can actually use the lighting inside of those render engines as if they were working in the real world. Now, that might be a little bit down the line for some people, but just so that you know, scale is really important. If you're not working to real world scale, you should always know what scale your 3D objects actually are. So I'm going to come over here and just delete this measuring tool over here. And what I'm going to do next is actually create a little proxy object. Now, what's a proxy? A proxy is an object that we tend to use for guessing kind of like what a final object would look like. It's not a finished asset, the whole tower. It's just something that's a rough approximation to the shape. So right now I've got these image planes, but what I'm going to do is create a proxy of the base of the lighthouse and this kind of like tower of the lighthouse as well as two separate objects, but I want to give them roughly the right size. So how are we going to do this? Well, what I'll start off with is by creating a cylinder inside of Maya. And by default, Maya will make a tiny 1 by 1 kind of like centimeter cylinder, which is not really that handy for me at all. But one of the things that I can do is if I go into the Create panel, I can come into Polygon Primitives and I can turn on this interactive creation tab over here. I had it on already, so I'm just going to turn it off very briefly and turn it back on over here. So I'm going to go into interactive creation. And what that's going to allow me to do is I'm going to zoom out of here. And Maya will now allow me to click and drag to create my 3D objects. So if I create a cylinder, I can click and drag in the middle of my scene and drag outwards like this interactively, so I can make the cylinder whatever size I want, like this. And then I can click and drag in the same view or in another one, and it will start giving me the height like this. Now, why is this useful? Some people love this mode because it allows them to quickly scatter 3D objects around their scene, and they can easily create scenes that are very, very, very large. But sometimes you want the precision of making things in the middle of the scene and at a specific size. So turning interactive creation on and off is a matter of preference. I'm going to press Ctrl A twice to bring up the channel box, which is a quick way of getting there. And you'll see that down in the channel box, I have some properties in here. Primarily, this polycylinder option is already open. If it's closed, you can just click on it inside of the channel box and it will reveal all of its properties inside of here. And I want to create a radius, how wide this tower is going to be. Now it's very thin and narrow, so I'm going to type in 110 centimeters. And you'll see that actually that is really, 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 really big. The height of this tower is going to be 13 meters and 25 centimeters, because that kind of matches my reference image. So I'm going to type in 1,325 centimeters inside of my scene like that, and that's going to create this huge tower over here. Now, my grid is lost inside of here, as you can see, and it's made this really, really, really long tower over here. One of the things that I'm going to do is just go out into my side view over here, and you'll see that the towers are actually, I'm just going to use F to focus on all of these a little bit quicker. You're going to see that the tower actually, its pivot point is right in the middle of my scene, just like this. Now, in Maya, we can use a very nice little trick to actually move our pivot point to the bottom of our scene. And the way that I can do that is to come over here, and I am going to use my keyboard to press the insert button over here. And the insert button is going to allow me to move the pivot point of the object. What's the pivot point? It's the point where the object rotates from, where it's built from. It's like the origin point of the object that I'm making. Now, where do I place it? How can I place this precisely? Well, one of the cool things that Maya has as well is that it has all of these snapping tools over here, which allow us to snap things in different ways. I can choose to snap things using a vertex over here. And if I look at this tower from the bottom in my perspective view, with the snap tool turned on, I can only now move the pivot to another vertice inside of the object. So if I come over here and I move this around, you'll see that I can click and drag and it will snap, there we go, by clicking in the middle, only to places that have vertices. What are vertices? They are the edges, the points where the lines in Maya connect to one another. And I've got one down here. After I've moved my pivot point, I'm going to press insert on my keyboard again, and that will turn this off. I'll turn off the snap mode because I don't need that anymore, but if I really want to, I can also have a snap mode that snaps things to the grid. And that's very handy for me as well, because it means that I can come up here and I can actually move the whole tower up in space, and hopefully, let's see, zoom in here. This grid is very tiny, so I might have to be a little bit more precise than this, so I'm zooming into my scene like that. And there we go, you'll see that it will align perfectly with the baseline like that. The cue for seeing if your snaps are turned on or not is that in the move tool, you see this little circle over here? If I turn the snap off, it turns back to a square, and that's Maya's visual cue for telling you that your snap tool is turned on. I'm going to zoom out here, but before I do so, I'm just going to hit the wireframe mode up here. And the wireframe mode is going to allow me to see through my objects. We're going to use this tool a little bit. Look at that. You see that the image that we had made, by comparison to the whole size of the real tower, is tiny. It's minute, okay? So never trust that the image that you're bringing into a scene is the correct size. You're going to have to make those changes yourself. And that's where this proxy object, again, I'm pressing spacebar to reveal my quad view, is where this proxy object can come in very, very, very handily indeed, like that. So now I've got my tower. I've got my different viewports over here, but now my reference is tiny. What should I do? Well, first of all, we're going to have to scale this reference up. It's currently aligned to the middle of the scene over here, and one of the things that I am going to do with this proxy object is just use it as a guide for how big I need to make this object over here. I'm going to select my image plane in my front view, and what I'll do is also zoom in by using the F key on all of these over here, and I'll make sure that I turn on wireframe mode so that I can actually see through the objects that I have selected like this. So again, press F on your keyboard after you've selected one of the image planes, and turn on wireframe mode by clicking on the wireframe menu over here. It's good to say as well that wireframe mode is tied to 4, the number 4, and shaded view, which is the button right next to it, is tied to the number 5. So these little viewport filters actually have little keyboard shortcuts that help make our lives a little bit easier, just like this. So, what's the next thing that we have to do? Well, select the image plane that you want, and what we're going to do is we are going to scale it up. But before I scale it up, I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did before. Currently, if I press R on my keyboard or press the scale button, which is over here on the left-hand side of the screen, if I scale something, it scales up from its pivot point, which in some cases is exactly what you want. However, if I come over here and I change that pivot point, again, I'm going to do it by pressing down on my keyboard and pressing insert over here. What I'm going to do is scroll down until the pivot point is on the base of the actual tower, like this. I'm going to make sure that that is aligned to the center line over here, just like that, okay? So now my pivot point is here. I want you guys to look at what happens when I scale the object now. So I'm going to hit insert again to remove the manipulate pivot point tool, and then I'm going to click in the middle of my scale tool one more time, and you're going to see that as I scale now, it scales from the bottom. From wherever the pivot point is, that is where this object is going to scale from. Again, I'll bring up quad view just to reiterate it. And another view, if I scale from here, it scales from the middle of the image. And in this image plane, because I've changed where the pivot point is, it's going to allow me to scale from the bottom. So loads of times when we're modeling and we're setting scenes up, we are actually scaling things again and again and again. And you'll see that in just a few clicks like this, I'm going to be able to make my tower roughly fit inside this proxy over here. Now, when you're creating objects, they're never going to match 100% one-to-one. What I'm going to do is make this roughly round about to the size that I know that that's 13 meters up there. I'm going to scale this object, and I can scale from any view over here, hopefully. There we go. Is it still scaling? Yes, it is. There we go. I'm going to come into here, and I'm going to scale this view. I can also use the middle mouse button as well to drag on my screen, and as long as I selected the central point, I'm just going to put it there at the top of that sphere over here in my reference. That's roughly where I calculated that it would be around that height, and I can depreciate everything else in the image. So again, I'm going to demonstrate very quickly how to do this, but I've got a big advantage now, which I have one size which should be perfect for all of my other views. So what's the first thing I did? I pressed insert on my keyboard and I moved the pivot point. Whenever I want precision, I'm using the Alt key and the mouse buttons to navigate around the viewport. Use those as necessary as well. And what I'm going to do is come into here and I'm going to check my reference like that, and I'm going to press insert on my keyboard again so that the pivot point in this view is right at the bottom of my reference image. Now I can scale up by clicking in the middle over here, but I already scaled this image up by itself. And here's one big advantage to what we just did, which is right now inside of Maya, that was the scale of that image. And because I did my work in Photoshop and I know that all the images are the same size proportionally, hopefully, fingers crossed, if I select the scale X, Y, and Z inside of the channel box and I Control V or Apple V inside of Macintosh to paste the value in, it should scale my scene, and hopefully, if everything's correct, it should be pretty much the same height as the other image that we just did, perfectly aligned one to another. And this should also work for the base as well. I might be out by a few decimal points because it's never exactly the same, but it should be absolutely fine. So again, I'm going to go into my top view over here, go into the scale view, paste in the value that I just copied from that one scale that I did, and then I'm going to zoom out, and you're going to hopefully see that we can see that here is the center of our proxy, just like that. So all of these images, they look like, now that I've changed the scale of them, this is the correct size where everything should be. And actually I've just noticed that my scene's upside down, because actually it should be just like that. So again, I've got this weird type of like intersecting looking image, and now what I'm going to do is again use the move tool just to move them in 3D space like this. So oops, grab this view in the wrong view. There we go. How did I know that that was wrong? You saw that I was looking at this image over here. I just dragged it from here, and you see how it's moving left and right on the bottom quadrant? Well, that's telling me that I'm moving it in the wrong direction. If I move my reference out of the way, it should never, and I do mean that in the sweetest of terms, it should never intersect the view. Another tip to look out for as well is that my proxy should be in front of my reference image. Let me show you with this view over here. I'm going to click on the front view over here, and I'm going to move it like that. Notice down here, if I move the actual image behind the object, you can see my wireframe on top of my image. That's perfectly fine. If I move it over here though, you're going to see that my wireframe disappears because the image is in front of the camera. So my orthographic camera is somewhere over here, and now I've got this image plane in front of it. So just make sure that you knock it back a few centimeters like that, and there we go. And then let's move this down over here. Now the cool thing about having a sense of scale is that at one point what we can do is we can start making other objects and figuring out how big those objects actually are. Thanks to the interactive creation mode that I showed you guys earlier, if I wanted to create another cylinder, okay, and I want it to be this base of this object down here, well, that base of that object is going to be a specific size, only that I never measured it out and I want to know what size it is. I could just use the measure tool and kind of like get an estimation for it, but I know now that thanks to my proxy, this object is roughly the right height. What happens if I'm a few centimeters off? Normally it won't matter that much, but if you're meters out, like we were before, then you're going to run into some problems, specifically when you get into lighting things or when you're working with other people. So I'm just going to do a final check over here, and I'm going to make sure that my proxy over here is aligned to 0 on the translate X, and it's aligned to 0 on the translate Z over here. So these lines are perfectly in the middle of my object. The next thing I want to do with my proxy is take this polycylinder, and I want to change the number of subdivisions that it has, and I'm going to turn it to 12. 12 subdivisions, because my reference image actually had 12 parts, like the face of a clock as well, of the low poly object. Now, if that's in the middle over here, I'm just going to double check that my images are actually in the right place and that they're aligning to the space over there. I always have the habit of getting closer to the screen when we want to see things in fine detail, but that's terrible for your eyesight as well, so be careful with that. And now it looks like everything here is properly aligned. I'm just going through my multiple views over here, just checking that everything aligns with these objects over here, and that is absolutely great. So now that I've done that, I'm going to take the cylinder tool, I'm going to do a little interactive creation on the top view, and I'm going to click and drag on the top view like that, and that is going to create the base of my lighthouse over here. And then I'm going to drag and set height, and notice that I'm going to use the view from the bottom, the front view over here, to look at how high I need to make that base over there. So the reason I love that is because right now, as soon as I've created this object, in my channel box, it's telling me that this is 4 meters 14 in radius, and that the height of it is about 40 centimeters. So actually this base is quite a big step over there. You'd struggle if you try to climb up it. So keep these things in mind, that you can always use the interactive creation mode to actually build your assets. Now, the other thing that you always want to do when you're designing an asset, specifically for production, is to make sure that your asset is actually in the middle of your scene like that. So lots of times I'm going to be using the X and the Z axis, the ones that we can see from the top view, and I'm going to be aligning things to the middle of the scene as well, just because it's good practice for things to be kind of like dead on center in the middle of your scene as well. People will appreciate it when you're trying to send them assets online. So after this is done, this is very much the stages of the proxy done by itself. This is a little asset that we can use to already send into a game engine or place inside of a more complex 3D scene. Maya's a very collaborative program, and it allows you to actually share files with other people. Maybe I haven't had enough time to model the whole lighthouse for the game, but I can actually send a proxy over to somebody and they can be designing animations or putting it into the environment scene. And as you go designing more and more and more things for this 3D object, there could be new versions that can be updated into the game, and little by little things go forming themselves as the different artists start sending their finished files or their work in progresses into the actual game. So collaboration is pretty key for what we're going to be doing professionally. So now that this is done, the next part of the tutorial is going to be a heavy look into the Polygon modeling tools over here, and you're going to see that there are tools that exist into the side of this menu over here where the channel box used to be. I'm going to go through quite a lot of these tools over here, but I'm going to also be explaining to you guys what they actually do. And for that, I might be building things in ways that I wouldn't normally build them, but I really want to show you guys what's the potential that each one of these tools have, because everyone can use them in whichever way they like. The only thing that I'm going to do very briefly before I start finishing off this asset is that I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select both of these objects. I've got this one over here, which is cylinder 1, and this one over here, which is cylinder 2. I haven't renamed them, actually, because I'm actually going to stick them together into a single object. So I'm going to merge them together using a specific operation tool here, which is called Boolean. And then I'll rename this asset before we actually save it out. So what we're going to do is make multiple selections. I'm going to click on one object using either the selection tool, the move tool, the rotation tool, the scale tool. They all work. Let's try the selection tool, which is tied to the keyboard shortcut Q. And if I click on this base and I press Shift and click on another object inside of Maya, I have to be precise because I've got to click on this shaft over here. What will happen is that I make multiple selections. Now, if I use Boolean, Boolean's a very cool tool inside of the Maya toolset, which allows me to stick two objects together. So if I take two separate objects, they're combined together. Now, whenever you're using some of these modeling tools, you'll get this little floating window as well. You'll see that there's different operations that I can do here. It could be the difference. I can use the cylinder to cut out a hole inside of this object. I could use them to do like an intersection, which is the difference between the two. But I'm really just interested in the union of both of these objects over here. And if I just tap Enter on my key and I change to another tool to stop using the Boolean tool over here, that's an important workflow thing, you'll notice that now if I click on this, this is one singular object, which inside the channel box, I'm going to call this Lighthouse Proxy. Okay, now it's very important to label things inside of Maya, and as good practice as well, you should always drop a number inside of your scene as well. Hopefully, if you're working in a studio, people will tell you how to name things, but it's always a good number in case you make copies of an object that you add little numbers to the end of them, just like that. Now, this little asset here can be perfectly saved out for an actual game. And again, one of the things that's good to do right now is that I can come over here and I can go into increment and save, and this increment and save will now save everything that we've done so far. The last thing that we could do is I can come into here and I can select this one object and I can go down and choose export selection. And what that's going to do is that currently it's only going to export my 3D geometry. And if this is a major milestone, it's sometimes worthwhile saving an asset yourself as well that you can always come back to. So I can call this Lighthouse Proxy .001. If I have a more complex pipeline and I have kind of like a folder for assets that are finished or anything else like that, I can save it there, but I'm just going to leave it here inside of my little Maya project over here inside of my scenes files over there. And as I mentioned before, these little Maya files, they can be saved and exported in different file formats as well for different purposes. But sometimes it's a good idea that the assets that you're making, you actually save like little separate versions of them because you can use them in different projects at different times. And the good thing about that is that you've saved a scene that does not contain these reference images, so you're not sending unnecessary data to other people. Okay. So we're going to start modeling now using the Polygon modeling tools, and Maya has this modeling toolkit in 2017 that's kind of short and contains a good selection of some of the most popular modeling tools. However, Maya has many tools, and specifically we're going to be modeling just with polygons, which are these objects which are made up of multiple faces and little pieces of geometry. And actually inside of Maya, if I just go into the modeling tab and look at the mesh tools inside of here, well, these are used for polygon modeling. The edit mesh tools are used for polygon modeling as well. These mesh tools are also used for modeling as well. There's some display options in here for customizable things. And this is just with polygons. There's actually a whole host of 3D sculpting tools inside of Maya 2017, curves and surfaces to use NURBS and splines and other 3D tools. It's a whole host of many different workflows that can exist inside of here. So please be aware that even if there's a small little section of tools over here that I'm going to be going over, that there's a whole other host of things in here as well, and professionals will be using lots and lots and lots of different tools all the time. So it's a good idea to know that there's a lot of things out there, but when you're starting out, you don't have to know every single one of these tools straight away. But it's important that you commit some time to learning them. And it's a good idea to go into the Maya help section inside of here and actually type in some of these names of what does extrude mean? What does bridge mean? And you'll find that some of the descriptions in here are actually fairly useful and quite practical in learning how these different tools actually work. So this is a proxy. It's a stand-in for something else. We know we're going to replace it. That's why it can have all of the topology errors that it could possibly have. And hopefully if it's just working for yourself or with some friends, it'll be fine. It might drive some of your technical directors mad if you don't work in a correct workflow. But essentially this object was just useful for us to give a rough sense and scale of what our 3D scene was like and to make sure that everything was right. But I'm not going to use this asset for this project. We're going to start refining it, and to do that I'm actually going to start again from scratch. I'm going to press Control H on my keyboard to hide the polygons. It's not been deleted, it's actually just been hidden away inside of Maya, and I can go into a menu called the outliner and call that back anytime I might need it. But inside of here you're going to see that it's best to start with a fresh slate right now because my scene's the right scale, and I'm going to start modeling by using the Polygon modeling tools. So first of all, it's important to know that I'm going to create a cylinder by using the shelf or by going into the Create Polygon Primitives cylinder. And using my interactive creation, I'm going to click and drag to make a cylinder that's roughly the right size of the base here in the top view. And then using my side view over here, I'm just going to make sure that the height matches the height on my reference ever so slightly. So now that I've created this object over here, it's important for us to always know that polygon objects will have specific components and specific properties. Most 3D objects will start off as a cylinder, as a box, as a plane, or something in between. Very few people use many of the other tools to build complex 3D objects. So here, what I can do is I can manipulate the properties of this cylinder to make sure that it's low poly and that it matches my reference. I do that by going into the channel box, and inside my channel box, inside the Poly Cylinders 3 tab, you'll see that there are certain properties that I can have in here. The first thing I'm going to do is come into my subdivision axis over here and turn that to 12. And that's going to take my cylinder and it's going to make sure that it's got 12 sides. Some people, when they're low poly modeling, will go down even to 8 sides for a cylinder, and it will look like it's a very geometric shape. But even these simple geometric shapes can be enough to suggest that this is going to be something round that we're going to smooth off later on. The next property I'm going to turn down is subdivision caps, and I'm going to turn that to 0 so that the top of the cheese wedge, or the different polygon faces that are in the top of this base, disappear as well. So again, I'm reducing the amount of information to its bare minimum. The last thing I want to do is go into the translate properties over here and make sure that my translate X is set to 0 and my translate Z is set to 0. I'm not worrying about the translate Y just for now because I might need to manipulate some things later on. And surprisingly enough, I got pretty close to how this object actually looks from my reference. Now, you might have missed this by a little bit. It might be that your polygon cylinder is actually maybe 300 centimeters in width over here, and it looks like that, and it's not the right size. In the radius, we can always type in the precise value of an object in here as well, or we could use the scale tool over here to manipulate its width until it's perfectly the right size as well. So there's many ways of doing it, but beware that as I make this smaller with the scale tool, you're going to see that Maya keeps the radius value at whatever it dropped, and it's manipulating the scale over here in the X and the Z axes to create the size that I need. Now, does this have to be precise? Not at this stage at all. We just want to make sure that our polygon matches the size of our scene. And right now, it's in a good place for me to begin with this. Another thing that I did previously, just before starting this video, is that you might see these little planes inside of some of your viewports. And Maya has some customizable viewport filters that allow me to hide the cameras, which are the orthographic camera objects inside of my scene. Because of the size of it, they're appearing. So if you find those confusing, just go into Show and turn off the cameras over here by clicking on them over there. It doesn't mean that the cameras are deleted from your scene, it's just hiding so that you can't select them by accident. So now that we're in this position over here, what we're going to start doing is I'm going to take this cylinder and I'm going to start manipulating its base components. So I'm going to come back into the modeling toolkit, and what I'm going to do is I am going to click on either these buttons or right click and hold on the object to bring up this specific contextual menu. Now this will only work if you have a polygon selected. You might get different controls if you have something else selected. But I want to talk about vertices, edges, and faces to start off with, okay? So what are vertices? I can also select them with this button over here. Well, vertices are these little points in space that make up the intersection of these lines with my in my 3D cylinder. You're going to see that if I select a vertice and I swap to the Move tool or press W on my keyboard, you're going to see that I can manipulate this component, this part that makes up the actual cylinder, and I can move it around in space. If I had various of them selected, I can rotate them as well. So I'm going to do a quick click and drag, and I can use the rotate tool to rotate those components, and then I can also use the scale tool to scale those components as well. That's why move, rotate, and scale is so important for you to learn how to use automatically. But it's really hard just to be manipulating one dot at a time, one vertex at a time, and that's why we have another mode. If I right click and hold and change to edge mode, the edges are these little edges that appear inside of Maya like this. And again, you'll see that it highlights red to show my selection, and I've swapped the background color of the actual selected image to actually be a slightly dark red over here. So don't be surprised if you've got a slightly different color. I've just changed it to make sure that people watching on YouTube can actually see that very clearly. So there, I just made a multiple selection by shift clicking on my screen like that, and it's the same idea. I can manipulate the shape of the cylinder by moving its edges. And polygons, either by pressing the button or right clicking and choosing faces over here, I can come over here and select individual polygon faces like this, and I can also move these around like that as well. I can move them in one axis, another, I can scale them, I can rotate them like that. So these three skills are going to be critical for you guys to start polygon modeling, which is actually taking the components, the vertices, the edges, or the faces, and manipulating them to turn them into all of this wonderful 3D goodness, which is inside of our reference. So how does that work? Well, we can't only move, rotate, and scale things. We also need other tools over here to allow us to create things. So I'm going to come back into my quad view so that we can take advantage of looking at various points of our reference. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the background plane for each frame, and I'm just going to frame it up a little bit like this by pressing F on my keyboard. So I can just select the image plane and press F, and that will scale my scene so that I can actually see as much detail as possible. If you want to refine it, you can just use the Alt and right mouse button to actually zoom in and out as well, but that should be just fine for our purposes right now. So I'm going to select the polygon again. It will still automatically jump into sub-object mode, so into the component mode in Maya 2017, which is a great thing in this new version. It simply means that if I'm working on any other object in my scene, it will remember the mode that I was in when I select it, hopefully. Now, what I need to do is introduce probably what is the most powerful tool inside of the whole Maya creation and skill set. And it's the one that beginners latch onto at the beginning, because with this one tool, you can make this entire tutorial. You do not need to learn anything else other than this one tool for this specific thing. But you lose out a lot if you don't have the flexibility of using multiple tools to create your own 3D objects. So the tool I want to talk about is called extrude, and you can find it here as a button, and you can click on it to activate it, or you can also press Control E on the keyboard and it will do an extrude tool as well. One of the cool things about Maya as well is that now if I leave my mouse over a specific tool, for many cases you'll have a little tooltip that will appear down here, and it will tell you a rough description of what it does, and sometimes it'll even play you a tutorial video that will show you what that tool actually does. Absolutely great for learning these things the first time round. So if I push the extrude button over here, you're going to see that the extrude button looks like a combination of the move tool and the scale tool. Now, this is important. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger in my screen by using the plus key on my keyboard so that you guys can see it clearly. This extrude tool has created a new face inside of my cylinder. And if I drag with the move component upwards, you're going to see that it generates a new face like this, and I can drag this up. But this is also not only a move tool that allows me to move this face around, it's also a scale tool. And if I click on this box over here on the side, it would allow me to scale my object like that. I'm just going to press Control Z very briefly to undo that. Or now that I've clicked on any one of these outside cubes, a little cube appears in the middle of my scene, changing me to scale mode so that I can scale this face from the center of my screen like that. Really cool. So this combines two tools in one. It creates a new face in this case, and then you can move and scale these faces as and when you need. So you're adding more detail to your 3D object. I'm going to press Ctrl Z and go back a few steps until we get back to where we were originally. And what I want to do is start cutting into this face a little bit of detail so I can create the base of my tower. So I'm going to zoom into my top view over here. I'm going to press the extrude tool. And with the extrude tool pressed, I'm going to press the scale cube over here so that now I can grab that middle cube over here. I'm going to drag it down, 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 down until I hit kind of like this inner ring of the reference over there. And that is the first cut that I've made into this polygon face. And you see that it makes all of these little faces and this face in here. So next, to get the height, I'm going to use the extrude tool to bring it upwards. But I just can't move it straight up, or it drags it up like that, like a cone. What I need to do is click the extrude tool again to use a second iteration of it. It will take that polygon face, it will make a copy of it, and it will add some extra geometry like that. So now in my side view over here, I can drag up, 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 up. I don't have to be too precise because I can just drag up, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and I can just come into here and I can put this right there precisely where I need. So I'm using the Alt and the mouse buttons to actually zoom into the areas where I need more detail, and I'm just clicking there. So now I'm going to click again on one of the scale cubes, bring up the central scale, and I'm going to scale, 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 scale like that, and my job is done. Okay? So that is pretty much the base of my actual lighthouse, kind of like done. This is like almost like the minimum objects. Now it looks like it's a little bit too thin at the bottom over here. It's not as large as it should be in my reference. So if I scroll down here, I see that there's kind of like a few things missing. It's a good time to talk about mistakes, okay? So before I kind of like finish this, let me go back a few steps and let me say what happens if you're not as precise or as confident as I am with using these tools. Let's say that I was here and I made my inner base a little bit too wide, so I missed this inner line that I was working with there. And then I pressed the extrude tool, and let's say I just went up to here, because this is all that my view allows me to do. It doesn't matter at what stage you're using these tools as long as you commit to refining them. So here are two mistakes that I'm going to try and solve very, very, very quickly, but not by using the extrude tool. Let's say I just clicked off it by mistake. And again, if you click off while using the extrude tool, well, it's gone. You know, it's not there anymore. You're going to have to either undo, or you can use the move tool and you can use the scale tool to fix any of the errors as long as you select the correct component to work with. So I'm going to keep working in face mode, and what I'm going to do is choose the move tool to select that top face, and what I'm going to do is scrub up, 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 up until this base over here, and you will see that, hey presto, we have ourselves reached the top of the tower like that. Now, I don't have to use the extrude tool again, I can go straight into the scale tool. And because I've still got that face selected, I can now scale this face down, 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 until it's touching the right areas. If I want to be even more precise, I'm just going to hide the grid by clicking on my viewport filter over here, and then what I'm going to do is just put that as close to the reference as I can. Very cool like that. Now what happens with this over here at the bottom? Okay, another purposeful mistake, which is very easy to make, especially when you don't have a lot of precision yet because you're still learning. Well, it's going to be very difficult to fix this just with the Polygon tool, but that with the Polygon face tool. But that's why we've got all of these other modes as well. And sometimes we're going to be making selections that are all about the edges of our polygons. Now, these edges over here, if I could select all of the edges that go around here, I can actually change the size of the bottom of this tower over here, just as long as I manage to select everything around. Many people might go straight ahead and hold down shift and do multiple selections like this, but there are two methods for selecting things in edge mode that every 3D artist should be aware of. One is called loop and the other is called ring. And what is a loop? A loop is when we select a polygon edge and then we want to select the next edge all the way around. Maya 2017 does this in a very easy way in which you select a polygon edge, you select the next one that is continuous to it, and you double click it. And you're going to see that now it made a selection, if I zoom out, all the way around my tower with just a double click. Really, 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 really useful. Now that's what we call a loop because it loops around the geometry by following those polygon edges. If I choose the scale tool now, I can scale that individual edge loop all the way down like this, and so I can scale my tower just like that. Now there's a second way of selecting things which would be specific for other things. Let's say I have a supervisor, an art director come over and says, yeah, I want you to, ignore the reference, I want that tower to be a little bit fatter. Well, in edge mode, another type of selection that I can make is what we call a ring. And it's a little bit hard to explain, but a ring is almost like the ring around your finger. It wraps itself around it like that. And what a ring is if I select a edge, and then I select the parallel edge next to it, and I double click again, it's going to do a a ring selection like that all the way around. So it selected all of the parallel lines that go around the object, and like a ring, it's wrapped itself around. And that's going to be very useful because if I grab the scale constraint over here and I scale this up and down, later on, even after I finish the modeling, I can actually change the width of this tower very, very, very easily. There's other ways of doing this as well, using the face tool or using the edge tool, the vertex tools as well, but these are two terms that you should kind of like have in your mind and learn how to use them. Last but not least, there are also keyboard shortcuts that do this as well, and in Maya traditionally they've been tied to the arrow keys. If I select this edge up here and I use the down arrow over here, I make a loop around my object based on its direction. So here, even though now I was selecting here, the flow down would kind of like do a loop selection. Oops, let me push the arrow key. There we go. Hello, why is that not working the way I expect? Okay, so it's doing a ring there, and it's doing a loop there. Okay, and if I swap this, down does a ring, and left does a loop, as it should. There we go. Don't know why I was getting those weird type of interfaces there. So again, ring and loop are also tied to keyboard shortcuts. Down keys and up keys for making different selections, and also you can use the arrow keys to cycle through your different selections as well. So if you keep pushing one of the arrow keys, in this case I'm pushing the right key, you'll see that it'll start taking that selection and kind of like cycling all the way through it. If I take a ring like this and press it multiple times, you'll see that I can also skip through the different ring sections inside of my Maya selection, like that. But the most intuitive way of doing this is to go ahead and to just double click in the direction that you want to go, and that will work for most modes. Face mode, vertex mode, you can make multiple selections like this very, very, very easily. So let's get back to actually continuing our polygon modeling of this tower. I'm going to move my reference planes so that I'm actually looking at this over here. A very important thing about reference is to always look at the detail that you're trying to build right now and not to build everything straight away. I'm going to ignore these little decorations which go around the tower and this banister over here. I'm just going to build the base object of this lighthouse for today. In the second part of this tutorial, we'll look about creating all of this additional detail and possibly finishing this off and doing a very simple render of it. Making these little steps for this little platform over here, again we're going to be using the extrude tool for now, but then I'm going to try and introduce some other tools as we get to the top of the tower. So right now we use the extrude tool twice and we've built quite a lot of detail right here. I want to keep building up the tower and then I will show you what else we can do. Now I'm going to use the extrude tool now to actually create two steps inside of the tower. And I'm going to do that in a very simple way by going again to the top over here, and you'll find that I'll choose the extrude tool one more time like that, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this in this view over here, and I'm going to move it up like that. So I've added like a subdivisional cut into here like that, and then I'm going to keep going upwards. This will seem like a little bit strange, but I don't want to follow the shape of the polygon tool exactly. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is it could keep pressing this button as many times as I like, but if you're using the command in Maya again and again and again, the best keyboard shortcut to use is the G key, because the G key means repeat last command. So if I tap on G on my keyboard, it's actually going to do another extrude, and this time I'm just going up. If I hit G again, I'm going to go up a little bit more, and I'm going to stop at the top of that platform there. So it's very important that now this is going a little bit off reference. Now I could have just done an extrude out, an extrude up, an extrude in, an extrude up, out and in, and keep making that shape like that. I'm going to do that for these little steps up here, but I want to show you a different way of appreciating how to make selections and using the extrude tool. So right now I've just been working in one axis, very easy, and what I'm going to do is take the polygon tool, face tool over here, and I'm going to make sure that in face mode I'm going to go and choose the move tool or the selection tool, and I'm going to do a loop selection but using the polygon face tool instead. So I'm going to click here on this face, and I'm going to double click on the one next to it, and you're going to see that it is going to select all of the faces that go around like this very easily. Now the next thing I'm going to do is now I'm going to use the extrude tool on a set of faces that I've selected like this. And now you're going to see that something strange is going to start to happen. If I grab the scale tool over here and I just try to scale from the outside here, as long as I select one of the constraint modes. So in this case, I'm selecting the translate X and the translate Z. I should be able to make it out. Now my screen space has finished, and I can't actually get to the end of this platform over here. It shouldn't really matter. I should be able to just keep going like that. And you can see that I can keep scaling as if it was from the center of the object. Now, Maya also gives you all of these little tools over here that will allow you to type values into here when you're extruding things here. But right now I'm still going to be using these visual tools instead. So I've just built this platform by clicking and dragging my extrude tool multiple times by only pushing this little green square over here. So I'm not actually scaling it from the middle, because you're going to see that that will also give it a width and height change as well. You can really notice the difference down here as well. So choosing the right part of the extrude tool is critical for what you're doing. But we've just made this wonderful platform over here in just a few clicks. The next thing that I'm going to do is make a selection and shift and double click the edge of the platform down here, and I'm going to do the same thing again. But what happens if I press the extrude tool and by any reason at all I made a mistake, and again I just missed it like that, and I've just clicked off it, and I'll go back and my extrude tool's gone. Just to save myself the time of having to undo and redo it again, because right now I can't tell here if there is an extruded face or not, I can shift and double click on all of this, and exactly the same way as we were fixing things before, if I just press extrude once and use the scale tool right from the middle of this actual object, now I can click on again the green plane over here, and my extrude is there. I clicked the button so it actually created new geometry, but now I can actually push this out and bring this out so that I've made this little base of the lighthouse right here. And hey presto, I've just built another component for my modeling, and you can see we're working our way up towards the top very nicely. So it's important to always remember that it's okay to make mistakes, and also for not thinking about working with these tools in just one particular way. As we move up the tower, I'll keep reiterating things. You can speed things up very greatly if you press G on your keyboard to actually use the last command again. Or you can press spacebar if you've been using multiple ones, bring up the hotbox, and in recent commands, you'll see up here it's poly extrude. These are all of the commands that have been recently used inside of Maya. Maya leaves them for you in a very convenient space, as long as you can press spacebar and keep it held down to bring up the hotbox over here. So how quickly can we actually model things like these steps? Again, it's very important to zoom in with our different views into the area that we want to be working in, like that, so that we can see things in a little bit more detail. But as soon as you learn how to use the extrude tool, things can be very, 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 very fast. I can come into here and I can start extruding and moving things up like this until I hit roughly the right height, and I continue using the tool like this. I then can hit G again and actually create myself a little bit of a step by changing to the scale mode like this, and then I can hit G again and use the move tool to move up. So notice that there's this pattern. I press G, I click on the scale tool, and I create the width of the tower, and then I can press G again to call the extrude tool up, and when I use the move tool I'm actually creating the height of the tower itself. Again, it's the same thing. Extrude, choose scale for the width. And one more time, extrude and use the move option to give height like that. That is all really, really, really useful and very simple for us to actually do. So you see that as soon as you get very dexterous with the extrude tool, you create things very, very, very quickly. But this is not the only way of working. Again, remember that I added additional detail here by changing the way I worked. And you're going to see that sometimes we'll take these very simple objects and we will manipulate them until they look like the reference, or we're actually creating the base of the object as we go along. The more 3D modeling you do, the easier this gets. But I made some little steps over here with width and with height. what happens if I want to make a curve like this dome up here? Well, this is a very handy part of the tutorial as well, because to create kind of like curves, we have to start using the move and the scale with the same edges. And I'll show you that very easily right now. So I'm going to make sure that I've got my selection still there. And I can either, again, push the extrude button tool if you need to, but I tell you, you can still use that G key for everything you need. I'm going to use the top view over here to look for the edge of the dome over here. And I'm just going to use the scale tool to bring it in kind of like that. I just want to check that I'm in the right place, give or take. There we go. Pretty cool. Just guess that there. So I've got this little ridge over here that I can just about see in my reference from the top view over here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this top part of the actual lighthouse and start creating the dome. I'm going to hit G on my keyboard to choose the extrude tool. I'm going to follow a very similar pattern as before. I'm going to use move to drag upwards and give myself the height of my dome over here. And as I zoom in, I can see that the edges should be pointing in a specific direction. So I'm going to press the scale tool and I'm going to scale inwards like this until the edge of this polygon touches that edge of the pixels over there. Again, don't worry if it's not perfectly right. Another thing I can see is that if I jump into edge mode, double click on that edge and create a loop, which should be done by default, what I'm going to do is scale outwards a little bit like that. There we go. And now I've just fixed that edge over there. Notice that the lines inside of Maya are always more precise than the pixels which are there. But again, don't worry if your reference doesn't match exactly line by line, point by point, the actual final thing that you're doing. Again, because this 3D view, that's what's important to get right. I will manipulate this to death rather than to try and stay perfectly on model all the time. So manipulating this to make it look good inside of Maya, that's the key thing that we have to be doing. So let's select the top face. Let's do another extrude. And we create curves, as I mentioned before, by moving things and scaling them within the same operation. So I moved it up, I then used the scale tool, and I scaled it in like that. Again, one more time, extrude, create the height, just work in one direction for now, and then click on the cube and scale it down like that. What happens if I'm not comfortable with this? What happens if I kind of like get confused between if I should be scaling or I should be moving things? It doesn't matter. Let me show it to you like this again. If I choose extrude, and let's say I did the scale first, and then I moved it, and I moved it too far, and then I clicked off, again, those wonderful worlds of mistakes, not a problem. Because again, I can go at any point back into this face, select it, go into my move tool, and as long as I follow my reference, I can always move this back to the point where it is meant to be at. And then, after that, I can change to the scale tool, by pressing R or the button on my keyboard, and then I move this in like that. And there we go. Now, we've created this dome at the top of my lighthouse. Very, very easily, very, very, very quick. And again, it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth right now, because it just has to have that low poly feel to it. So by extruding in different directions, either in height or in width, we can create things like steps, like this. And if we're moving and scaling the edge in the same operation, we can create curves like this. How many subdivisions do I need to do? It depends on your curve. Very tight curves will need more subdivisions. Very shallow curves will need very few. So, as I mentioned before, you can continue working your way up the tower, and all of this stuff, absolutely all of it, can be done with the extrude tool. But it's important to learn other tools as well. And I want to just show you a very quick difference of using the extrude tool in face mode as in using the extrude tool in edge mode over here. What I'm going to do is press backspace or delete on my keyboard, and I'm going to delete that top face that we were working with. Select it if you have to. And then I'm going to change into edge mode and double click to select all the way around. Sometimes it's easier to click on the one next to it so that you know exactly that it's going to go in a loop and not off somewhere crazy. But this loop over here can also use the extrude tool in exactly the same way. If I choose extrude in edge mode, you're going to see that it's going to create edges. But as I move them, you're going to see that it's going to follow what we call the surface normal, the direction in which this edge over here and this edge over here is kind of like at 90 degrees between here and here. I'll just highlight those edges there. So that's almost like a 90-degree edge over there. I don't have to allow Maya just to do things in this way. Sometimes that's pretty convenient. But the other thing that I can do is that if I switch to the move tool, you'll see that after I do my extrude, if I change to the move tool straight away, I can move using the world direction. So that up and that down like that. If again I do another extrude over here, if you look over here, you'll see that there are some settings over here as well, which again, if I choose the local translate over here, you see that I can do something that looks like a scale inside of this extrude like this. So again, play around with these options here. There are many, many, many different settings that are going to allow me to change things like this. Here's another good opportunity for me to notice that maybe I wanted to put this edge line just a little bit higher. And one of the quick ways that I can fix this is if I'm in my orthographic view over here, I'm just going to change to the selection tool to show you guys how to fix this over here. Maybe I want this line to be a little bit higher, but if I just move this edge, it's going to move both of them. Now there's many ways of fixing this. I could come into here and I could change into face mode and I could grab all of these faces here. So if I just do a quick double click over here, grab a loop and move it up, that will work fine. But sometimes it's just so easy to grab a vertex and actually just click and drag in the side view and move all of those vertices up just by making multiple selections by clicking and dragging, that every selection mode becomes useful inside of Maya. And whatever way your mind thinks about making things, it doesn't matter because Maya will actually just respond to the way that you think. So again, making extrudes in edge mode, you just have to be careful about which direction things are going in, because all of a sudden they might not work the way you want. And you have to be careful as well, because another thing that happens is that if you select an edge like this one over here, and we extruded that, and we just moved it around randomly like this, you're going to see that edges will always project from wherever they've been selected. So you can have loads of hidden things if you're not careful. Just make sure that you're never kind of like hitting any of these buttons or tapping the G key repeatedly, because then you'll just extrude multiple times and everything will be in the same place. So now that we're here at the top, okay, and I've just shown you very briefly how to keep using extrude, but with the edge tool and with a little bit of the help of these menus over here to help me do my scale a little bit quicker, let's think about this little kind of like decoration up here, okay? Now, this little decoration over here, I could kind of like keep extruding, but this pretty much looks like a sphere. And it's very, 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 very easy for me sometimes to reuse assets from other places. Sometimes it's a lot easier to make a new object and almost like digitally glue it into another, like this sphere, instead of trying to model a perfect geometric sphere by hand using the extrude tool. Maya will beat you at geometry every single day of the week, hands down. So what I'm going to show you guys is I'm going to go into object mode by clicking here or right-clicking on my polygons and choosing, hopefully, if I can actually just, there we go, object mode, like that. And what I'm going to do is go back and create myself a sphere. I'm going to do this in the top view over here. I'm going to click and drag. Now remember that that's going to be all the way down at the bottom of my scene, like that. So I will have to go back in one of my orthographic views. There we go. And I will have to move this upwards, like that. Put it roughly in the place where it should be. Oh my god, it's huge. And there we go. I'm just going to tap R bring the scale tool down, make that sphere nice and small. The other thing I'm going to check is that it's in the middle of my scene, so I'm going to change the X translation and the Y and the Z translation in the channel box to 0, and then I'm going to manipulate it like we did at the cylinder at the beginning. I'm going to take the subdivision axis and I'm going to change that to 8. Let me just double check. Have I done that in the right way? Nope. That's the subdivision axis is going to be 12. So that if I look at this from the top, again, it will have 12 subdivisions all the way around. And I'm going to again do it very low poly. I think I chose 8 originally for this. And yeah, that pretty much almost matches my reference 1-to-1 there. I think you could turn it down even lower if you wanted to, like 6, but I think that that is kind of like the bare minimum for me to sell off kind of like what a sphere should look like in low poly. Now, what we want to do next is we want to connect this tower to this sphere over here. And how are we going to do that is, again, thanks to the power of the modeling toolkit as well. Now, the thing I'm going to do just before I start is if I wanted to make a polygon selection of this, you see that I've got an open face over here in the tower, and I've got another kind of like closed geometric object down here. I could spend a lot of time kind of like selecting all of these faces up here, and I could try to do kind of like a loop selection, but you're going to see that if you try to do these types of selections in objects that do not have good topology, like these triangles over here, you're going to see that the ring and loop is not going to work. It works fine on four-sided faces like this, so you see it's very easy for me to select things like this and like this, but as soon as I've got objects where it could flow in one direction or another, or these triangular faces over here, Maya's going to be a lot more confused in how to do this. So one of the cool ways that I would recommend for you guys to kind of like select things is, again, to use multiple views. I can come into here and I can click on face mode, and then what I'm going to do is click and drag. I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit further so that you guys can see just a little bit better. I'm going to click and drag and do a March and Ants line selection that just touches all of these top faces over here, and you see that just by doing that selection, it do what I couldn't do with the ring and loop selection up here really easily. And then I can just delete the top faces over there. Now, what about the bottom ones over here? Well, again, I want to have this like an open tube so that they both connect into one another perfectly. I'm going to click and drag down here, and you're going to see that I select all of these faces down here at the bottom, and I can actually delete those faces there perfectly. Okay? So what I've done now is that I've pretty much hollowed out my sphere over here. And notice as well that 3D objects are actually hollow. The person who first trained me always told me that it's like soap bubbles. You're only concerned about the skin of the 3D mesh. You never have anything that's kind of like solid or kind of like there's no concrete in here, there's no glass, there's no beams supporting anything. It's just simple geometric faces on the outside of a skin. So now how do I connect all of this stuff up so that it looks kind of like what I've got in my reference? Well, the way I'm going to do that is now I need to combine these two objects together. So I'm going to go back into object mode, first of all, and I'm going to do a multiple selection by holding down Shift on my keyboard. And I'm going to press Shift and select the tower, and Shift and select the sphere up here. And then I'm going to use in my polygon modeling tools the option Combine over here. Now Combine is now going to stick both of these objects together. And I'll go into my channel box, and depending on the order that we selected these things, we will either have a polygon cylinder here or we will have a polygon sphere. Now, importantly for us, I should really be renaming these objects as I go along. So I'm going to call this object Low Poly Lighthouse. And I'm going to give it an 01 as a number. Just in case I ever make a copy of it, Maya will automatically assign it a second number. Now, I've managed to stick these two separate objects together, and it's a lot faster sometimes to just build little geometric pieces and stick them together. It gets even better when you've got multiple objects that you've been working with over time. You can just kit bash them together very quickly. But now what I want to do is I want to close these gaps in between these other areas over here. So I'm going to go back into the modeling toolkit. I'm going to introduce you guys to another simple tool, which we've just used combine, and I'm going to be using a tool under extrude, which is called bridge. Now, bridge is very, 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 very useful for us because what it allows us to do is to actually close gaps in between two objects. I'm going to choose the edge tool, and the edge tool, I'm going to double click on a singular edge like this to do a loop selection all the way around my object like that, and then I'm going to do another double click in here as well to select the bottom of the sphere like that as well. And then when I press bridge, bridge is going to bridge the gap in between those two polygon faces. It's going to create new faces inside of here, and if you wanted to, you could add more divisions by clicking and dragging here, and you can see that I can create multiple divisions like this. If these were at an angle, you could create a taper to them or twist them around as well. Sometimes you might see a mistake that kind of like looks like this, where all of the faces have kind of like snapped in another direction. Well, you can move them back by playing around with the twist function, but I'm going to bring that down to 0 so that it fits like that perfectly. Okay? So bridge is bridging the gap between two polygon faces, and I'm going to accept that those edges there, sorry, polygon edges, as you can see here. So what I'm going to do, for example, is again show you guys at the top over here that if I took one edge over here, selected another edge, and hit bridge, it's going to create a polygon face in between those two there. And if I grab this face and I hit bridge again, it will create another polygon face in between those two edges. It's fairly smart in the direction in which it goes, but beware that if I selected like two faces here and another one over here and hit bridge, Maya's going to take the last few that you selected as the preference. So don't expect it to be too smart and do all the heavy thinking for you. Coming back down here for a second, now that we've introduced the bridge tool, one thing that happens is that sometimes we want to take geometry out of our models. And for example, I've got this edge over here, which I'm just going to double click and move up just a little bit so that my sphere actually starts in the middle over here, as it should do. But what happens with this edge over here? Sometimes you have to go back and clean things up, or sometimes you've added way too many edges than you've needed. What happens if I want to delete this polygon edge over here? Well, you have to be a little bit careful, because most students I tend to find, if I double click over here on this edge and I do a loop selection, well, you think, oh, I want to delete that. I will just press delete on my keyboard, and that's fine. But you're going to notice that something happens, which is if I go into vertex mode over here, you'll see that if I click and drag so you guys can see clearly, the vertices of the original line, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and all the way around, they're still there. Those vertices still exist in the geometry. So again, if I undo this a few times, just to get back my edge loops like that, if you want to delete an edge loop or any edge inside of Maya, what you have to do is not just press delete on the keyboard, you have to press Control and backspace to actually erase both of them. And now if I go back into vertex mode, you'll see that there's no vertices hidden away in here. It's a little bit advanced, but it's something to be aware of. When you want to delete edges, press Control and backspace to erase them properly from the geometry. And we're almost getting to the top. There is just one last thing that we needed to do over here, which if I had left my original sphere intact, I could have just grabbed that one point at the end of my geometry and just moved it up like that. Done. But again, I'm trying to be a little bit round the edges over here to show you guys a few other tools and a few other cases of what happens when you start modeling things. The next thing that we need to do is I'm going to go into my edge mode again. And I'm going to double click here. And again, we're going to create some geometry this time by using an extrude. And I'm going to use the move tool to move all of these polygon faces up to the end of that spire, pretty much to those pixels over there. So now that we're ready, we're going to come over here, and what we're going to do next is we are going to scale this down over here a little bit, And we would always end up with a little kind of like ring at the top over here. If we ever want to have a face that we want to close down or collapse into a single point, well, what we do is that we select the vertices that we want to connect together, and inside of the edit mesh tools, I'm just going to tear them out a little bit. This tool is specifically not inside of the Polygon modeling toolkit over here. The tool that I'm looking for is a tool that is called merge, or merge to center. Now, merge to center is really cool because what it does is that you just click it and it will take the average of all of those points that you've got selected and it will slap them into a singular point in space, like the end of this right here. If you're using merge, however, just to show you guys the difference, and I bring up the merge vertices options over here, you're going to see that there is this threshold, which I think by default is like 0.1 or something like that. If I press the apply button here, you're going to see that nothing happens because Maya's going to measure out from the middle of the selection how many points are in that area and collapse only those points. It's a great way for reducing information based on a distance over here. But if I chose a value of 4 and hit apply, you're going to see it's going to have a very similar result to merge to center. So sometimes you want to merge things to the center, other times you just want to merge vertices that are close to one another. But as I said before, these are just ways of looking through the tools that exist in Maya for making different things. And some of them are contained here in the modeling toolkit, and others are contained up here inside of the mesh tools up here. So now if I come back to object mode and I zoom out just to have a look at my work so far, and I come over here, over here, over here, I'm tapping F on my keyboard as I go along, you'll see that I've managed to create a fairly simple low poly version of this lighthouse over here. Now there's still a lot of detail missing, but this is probably a closer object to what my scene would actually look like if it were inside of a game engine or I was preparing it to show it to my supervisor or something. At this point I can already start showing people this is what the object is going to start looking for. This is a stage that we tend to call blocking, where we've just blocked out our scene. So it's a good time to do a file, increment and save, and there we've got our scene over here. And I can now select this over here and also do a file export selection over here. And what I'm going to do is call this version of my asset, instead of lighthouse proxy, I'm going to call this lighthouse blocking version 1 over here. .ma, make sure it's saving as Maya ASCII, and hit save. Again, save that wherever that's necessary. But this asset in and of itself is now the updated version that you could send off to a client, send off to a game engine, and again, it's a way of getting work that's iterative, work that you're refining things little by little as you go working, rather than waiting for the big moment when your 3D scene is completely finished for you to show off to other people. So this is going to be the end of this tutorial over here, and it's just to get you guys practicing the move, rotate, and scale tool, and also for you guys to start playing around with the different component selection modes. There are some things that I haven't covered here, which I will cover in a following tutorial, where we're going to keep building all of the rest of the detail of the geometry for the lighthouse, still in very low poly, but using some of the other tools which are inside this modeling toolkit. Now, I hope to see you guys, practicing these things in your own time, because even if you can make this lighthouse over here, it's very important for you to be able to start finding your own reference and building your own objects, even if they are very blocky and very rough at this stage. So thanks for watching this tutorial. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Especially good job in making it till the very end, and make sure that you go out and practice. I'll be giving you the second part of this tutorial next week. So currently I'm trying to settle on which days I should be publishing these tutorials. They'll probably have to be somewhere early in the week, but between Monday to Wednesday for me seems like a great time. Let me know when you'd like to get your next bunch of Maya. Add any comments you may have to this down below, and hopefully the channel can grow and get better as well over time as well. I'm even recording these, I'm noticing a lot of things that could be better, that I could be fixing, but you guys keep me on point all the time. So if you like the video, drop us a like there. If you want to get a new video every week, please subscribe to the channel over here as well. And I'll be looking forward to see you guys next week and hopefully seeing you guys make some awesome 3D work. Again, keep learning and keep strong on trying to learn as much as you can in Maya. See you soon. Bye.